Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We have reached the very last week of summer reading program, so that means today is the very last Tales and Tales book and movie recommendations video post. I have had such a fantastic time going through and revisiting old favorites, discovering new favorites, and I hope that you've been able to find a few new titles for yourself as well. Um, Last week we were all about fabulous felines, so I figured since we're closing things out, let's let today go to the dogs. So of course, all of today's recommendations are stories that are dog friendly. Some are really, really moving. Some are just plain old fun. I've always been a cat person, but I love a good dog story, and I think there's some really fantastic ones in this little selection that I have for you. Um, as always, these titles are available via CleaveNet, so you can place holds on the physical media. They can be sent directly to Milan or Berlin or to any other library within the Milan-Berlin or within the CleaveNet system if that's easier for you. But yeah, you just need the use of your Milan-Berlin library card and you should be all set. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get to these last recommendations. Okay, my first recommendation of the week is my literary pick, and that is the title Lily and the Octopus by Stephen Rowley. Now, this is an incredible, incredible novel. It is wonderful for people who are looking for an emotionally complex story, one that will really take you on a total journey. It is at times absolutely hilarious. I laughed out loud multiple times, and it's also completely tragic in others. You will absolutely need a box of tissues unless you have one of those really solid stone cold hearts, because man, this is a rough read. Lily and the Octopus tells the story of Ted, this rather isolated, lonely gentleman whose only real connection is to his beloved dachshund Lily. Lily eventually becomes ill, and the story is really Ted being determined to do absolutely everything he can to save this beloved companion. And as a pet owner, as someone who has lost pets in the past, as someone who does tend to get really emotionally invested in a pet, I completely was drawn to the character and his relationship and his desperation. I mean, I think that's the most relatable thing. If a pet is sick, we don't necessarily let the outside world know how that affects us, but when we're with that pet, when we're just in our own heads, you do have that sense of complete and utter panic that that pet is your baby. What do you do? And you get that overwhelming, swamping emotional intensity from this book. You also get, like I mentioned before, plenty of moments of levity, but really it's that sort of panic, that encroaching grief that I think makes this book impossible to put down even when it's a hard read. It's when it gets to moments that are difficult. A lot of times if I'm reading a book that's just too emotional, I'll just put it down for a while and stop. But like with Lily and the Octopus, I just wanted to keep going. I wanted to keep reading. I wanted to continue with Ted and Lily's story. And, I think that's kind of the magic of stories about pets. Like, we are so easily transported to that sort of headspace. What I think is also really interesting on a meta level is that Lily and the Octopus was Stephen Rowley's way of dealing with the death of his own beloved pet. He wrote this story as a teeny tiny novella originally and was convinced to sort of expand it. It's actually so popular and so appealing to so many people that it's been optioned for movie rights. And I 100% can see why. Again, I think stories about owners and their pets and the connection and bond between those are infinitely relatable to everyone, regardless of where you are, what kind of pet you have, you know. And this book does such a good job of really dialing in on those little moments between the two. Um, I did mention that it is a hard read in places, so if you are personally dealing with a great deal of pet death yourself, um, this might not be the book for you to read right now, but I strongly recommend it once you're past that bubble. But this also might be a good cathartic read for someone. It just depends on how you react to these kinds of stories. So, in any case, if you are a pet lover, if you um, do enjoy stories that really go there as far as emotional depth goes, please, please, please check out Lily and the Octopus. It is, you know, challenging but charming at the same time, and you will absolutely just race through. It's a challenging read, but a fast one at the same time. So again, Lily and the Octopus by Stephen Rowley, phenomenal, phenomenal novel. Moving right along to our film recommendations for this week. The first of those is for the phenomenal stop motion animation feature Isle of Dogs. Isle of Dogs is from the mind of Wes Anderson, and I have been a massive Wes Anderson fan for years and years. Royal Tenenbaums, Hotel Budapest, Bottle Rocket. I mean, he's just got such a very, very specific vision. And despite the fact that um, Isle of Dogs is a little different from, say, your Royal Tenenbaums, it still manages to evoke the same kind of odd, quirky connections. Fantastic Mr. Fox was the exact same way. Even though you're dealing with very different, very specific mediums like stop motion animation versus live action, there's so many different elements to each art. You still manage to get the sense that he's able to imbue specific emotions, feelings, vibes into his movies so that they absolutely all feel like Wes Anderson movies. Isle of Dogs deals with the story of a young boy named Atari who is on the hunt to rescue his exiled dog Spots. Now, Spots has been exiled due to a canine flu that is running rampant and that has the danger of becoming passable to humans. So the mayor of this fictional Japanese town has enacted this order where all dogs are to be exiled to an island that eventually becomes known as the Isle of Dogs. There is a lot of classic sort of journeying folklore kind of legend story to this tale, and then there's also a ton of just plain old Wes Anderson weirdness, and both the elements really work together somehow. I don't know how that manages to be because East Asian folklore has a very specific feel to it, but it still manages to blend quite nicely. Isle of Dogs has a phenomenal, phenomenal cast made up of primarily Anderson regulars. You have voices like Bryan Cranston, who plays one of the main dogs, Chief. You have Courtney B. Vance, who plays the narrator. He also acts as translator because the Japanese characters' lines aren't actually subtitled or anything. They're sort of relayed both through facial expression and then, of course, this narration from Vance. You've got Angelica Houston, who was also in several other Anderson films, playing a small role. Liev Schreiber is in this. Bill Murray is in this. And it's all just sort of perfectly put together. The Even though it's filmed in an entirely different way, you still get that very ensemble cast feeling. Um, so tie those elements to this sort of more traditional feel of this classic fable, and you just have this really interesting meeting of multiple worlds. Now, Isle of Dogs was also kind of controversial when it came out. There was certainly a faction of the audience who felt that a lot of the Eastern treatments were rather insensitively done, and I 100% can see why you would feel that way. But I think a lot of Western media that pulls from Eastern Asia also has that sort of questionable feel to it. Is it opportunistic or is it honoring? And that, I think, is very much a personal decision. You have to see this. There's another reason besides just entertainment to watch Isle of Dogs. It's to watch it and see if you can understand why a faction of the audience would be potentially offended by some of the treatment or some of the depictions of certain kinds of characters. Or are you only able to watch it on that one surface level of, is this fun or not? As someone of Japanese descent, I definitely get those elements of why this might be in part considered insensitive. At no point do I ever find it particularly offensive, but I get where you might see it as like where you might give it the side eye. And again, I think those are reasons to watch things like this. I think the more exposure we give to films like this, the more we can talk about it, the more we can sort of communicate with one another about how we're feeling about what's going on. I think those elements are really, really important to film in general, but just to the world in general, you know. So please check out Isle of Dogs. Of course, watch it for the entertainment factor. It is a phenomenally well done film. If you like Wes Anderson movies, you will absolutely love this. It's a great journey kind of story. Atari is a thoroughly likable little character. All of the dogs are magic. They're just amazing. And just the story overall, I really, really loved so many elements of it. And then, of course, watch it and look for those controversial bits and pieces. See if you can empathize, see if you can understand. And, you know, if for no other reason than to just sort of expand your horizons or viewpoint, that's yet another really great reason to check out Isle of Dogs. Available in Blu-ray and on DVD via CleveNet. My next pick is for a Hungarian film called White God. White God I had never heard of prior to putting together this list, but I am so glad that I watched it. It is a really beautifully, beautifully done movie with an exceptional storyline. It tells the story of this young girl named Lily who is forced to give up her beloved dog, Hagen. Hagen happens to be a mutt. He's a mixed breed dog, and in this region where they live, mutts are considered lesser. So there are like higher taxes on owning them, and there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through, and it's just a really tragic situation. Anyway, she ends up being separated from this dog that she absolutely adores, that she absolutely is bonded to, by her estranged father, who she has like literally no relationship with. And that's where the whole story becomes this sort of snowball of tension and madness, and it ends up being kind of oddly like a little bit like a doggy Planet of the Apes in a way. You have this faction of dogs that are essentially trying to develop a bit of an uprising against these humans that have murdered, exiled, banished them purely for being, of mixed breeds. And then you have these humans who live their lives viewing these dogs as being so much less. And then you also have the story of this father and daughter, this young girl who ends up having to go live with this man that she doesn't know. And this man who, he loves his child, but he has no relationship with her. And he sees this dog and sees nothing but problems with it, which is why, we get to the situation that we're in from the get-go. Lots and lots of layers. There are moments that are really beautiful and moments that are really terrible and incredibly hard to watch. But it is, on the whole, one of the most compelling little watches I've seen in quite some time. I mean, I was glued to the screen. I wasn't sure how it was going to end up. I am personally not super familiar with Hungarian films, so I don't know what way their movies tend to turn. Do they stick with a really nihilistic sort of point of view? Are they more prone to happy endings? So I was just like, what's next? What's going to happen? Who's not going to make it? And so I do think that sense of tension is felt throughout the movie. If you like I don't know that I would call this a suspense movie. It's definitely got suspenseful moments in it though. So if you like that sort of edge of your seat dramatic tension, because it's definitely a drama, White God is so good. I really found all the acting super compelling. The emotional content was really, really thick throughout. Please check it out. It is in a foreign language film, but please, it is so worth watching. Again, White God, Hungarian film, really, really fantastic and totally worth a watch. So my next recommendation is for a somewhat more human-centric story, but one in which the doggy plays an absolutely pivotal role, and that is the movie As Good as It Gets. This is one of those films that occurred later in the super famous actor's life that just sort of snowballed into this huge, massive media thing. Of course, I'm referring to Jack Nicholson, who plays the main character, Melvin Udall. Melvin is this total jerk. He's obsessive compulsive. He's also just mean in a lot of this movie, and a writer of romance fiction of all things. One wouldn't think that someone who's so impossible to be around would be able to write these really floofy characters, but he does. And there's even an entire scene about how he gets to the mindset of these characters that he writes. And he is very isolated. He is isolated himself, and also people just don't want to be with him because he's such a pain. That is, of course, until his neighbor, who he's also incredibly rude to, is severely injured, and Melvin is then required to take care of this neighbor's little tiny dog, and his entire life changes at that point. I think that element is so beautiful, how Melvin goes from being someone who has no emotional connections to really anyone to begrudgingly having to take care of this tiny, tiny furball that he already resents, to then slowly growing to see this furball as something to relate to caring, to absolutely adoring, because by the end of the movie he adores this dog. To him being able to connect not just to the dog, but starting to be able to really connect, or at least want to connect, with human beings. And I think that journey is one of the reasons why, despite me never liking Melvin, I like this movie. Um, I have a friend who really loves this film and likes Melvin throughout all of it, and I think that we, even if we both end up in different viewpoints of that main character, we still both are able to find ways to enjoy watching the film. Um, you've got a phenomenal cast. Of course, you have Jack Nicholson playing this fairly unlikable primary character. You've got Greg Kinnear playing his neighbor. Helen Hunt plays a waitress that um, Nicholson's character essentially starts to have feelings for. And of course, you have this uber adorable little puppy thrown into the mix, and there's just movie magic going on between all of them. It really is one of those films that I think is thoroughly touching without being saccharine in any way. And I do believe that when you're able to have something like that with that kind of a journey for a main character, it's really hard not to make it feel at least a little bit movie of the week. And this at no point feels that way. It really, really doesn't. It's definitely strange and dry and sarcastic throughout. It's not like Melvin is a completely different man at the end of the film. He just has learned to care a little bit and to want to care. And I think that makes it really believable and really real in a lot of ways. You still have that sort of like happily ever after ish vibe to it, but it doesn't feel like a fairy tale. It feels like just somebody's story. So if you're looking for something fun and feel good that will absolutely make you laugh, that will certainly have elements of like heartwarming scenes, then check out As Good as It Gets. If you've seen it before, if you haven't, it's totally worth another view. It's worth a first view, certainly. Again, As Good as It Gets. Check it out. Okay, my very last pick of this week, and I guess my very last pick of our Tales of Tales series, is for the family-friendly film Oddball and the Penguins. Now, I had never even heard of Oddball and the Penguins before I put together this list, but it is the story of a odd dog named Oddball, and his surprising need to protect a group of penguins. It's obviously much more complex than that. We have this dog who is actually considered quite a menace to the town in which he lives. He's just, a little bit naughty, and he causes some problems in the village. And it actually gets to the point where the village leadership tells his owner that if it continues, he will be euthanized. You've also, in addition to the story of Oddball, got this situation going on with the penguins. They essentially live on this little sanctuary that the village has, that's supposed to act as a safe breeding ground where they can freely be together and grow their little penguin families. But a sudden influx of foxes or something goes on, and suddenly the birds are dying off, and these fox murderers are getting away with it. So you've got these two elements going on simultaneously, and what pulls both of these situations together are the humans involved. Oddball's owner is this weird, eccentric chicken farmer, and one of the people who's sort of most invested in the penguin sanctuary, it happens to be this Oddball chicken farmer's daughter. So on top of Oddball's story, Penguin story, you've also got a bit of family drama going on as well. Things really get rolling when the chicken farmer discovers this very injured penguin on his land, and Oddball becomes surprisingly protective of the penguin. He essentially becomes this penguin's guard dog, and being familiar with the danger to the penguins in the little penguin sanctuary, the farmer decides to, through a series of events, make Oddball their sort of guardian. Um, there's so much that goes on in this little movie. At no time is it so complex that a young person would not be able to follow it, but there's a level of complexity that I think really would appeal to any viewer, whether it's a child or an adult. And there's so much going on within the family tension. The human drama is pretty complicated, and I really, really enjoyed this movie. Like, I would never have thought that a movie called Oddball and the Penguins would have been my cup of tea, but I had a great time while watching it. I enjoyed the mystery of what is really going on with the penguins. I enjoyed the on-screen antics of Oddball. I really, really enjoyed the actors within this. Alan Tudyk plays a small role, a small but pivotal role in this, and I'm a huge Alan Tudyk fan. But really, all of the different elements, despite how disjointed it might seem on the surface, really blend and flow together and create a really entertaining family movie. Now, this is sort of, I guess, loosely based on a true story, one that I certainly was not familiar with before. But on reflection, I guess I could see this happening, but it seems so fantastical that it definitely feels like it must be fiction. It doesn't, at the same time, it doesn't necessarily feel fake in any way. I don't know. I enjoy a good based on a true story film, and this one works really, really well. It's just a nice, fun, enjoyable way to spend an evening. So if you're looking for something that everybody in your family can watch and enjoy, I think Oddball and the Penguins might be a really fantastic choice for you. So with that, our Tales of Tales video series has reached its end. Thank you so, so much for joining me every week. Again, I have had so, so much fun putting these lists together. If you have a recommendation for a really fantastic dog movie, if you are curious about any of the titles themselves in this week's list and you want to ask some questions, comment below. I love hearing from viewers, and I know that I always enjoy getting others' recommendations. If you have any recommendations for film themes that you'd like to see in the future, please comment with those as well. We will continue to do our Film Rec Friday for the foreseeable future, so you can always be sure to tune in on Fridays. Those films are not focused on physical media. Those are all based on our digital media platforms, but those also have thousands upon thousands of recommendations, so please do check out the Film Rec Friday video streams as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to close out the series. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy watching. Bye.